Welcome, welcome. This is virtual production, the new wave of digital collaboration. If my fellow panelists here can start their mics and video, we're going to get started. Great. Hello, welcome. All right, couple items of business here right off the bat as we're getting started. This is, of course, CS Presents, a series of nearly weekly inspirational and educational webinars from creative professionals around the world. Please ask questions by using that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Thank you to Creative Solutions, made up, of course, of Teradek, Small HD, and Wooden Camera for their support of the stream. And don't forget to follow their various social channels. If you're joining us on YouTube, please make sure to click subscribe on Teradek's channel for more content exactly like this. And this is a big one. We're looking at probably 60 to 90 minutes or so here for this one. So please buckle up. We're going to talk about virtual collaboration, and this is very much a joint exercise today between the three of us. This panel has a broad title because we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. We could have called this Emerging Tech for Film and TV, or simply ways to adapt to the current pandemic. But the truth is we're going to focus pretty much on all of that under the same umbrella. If you work on huge projects, small projects, it's our hope that there's something in here for everyone. So I want to introduce everybody. First, of course, I'm Graham Ayler Sheldon. I'm a filmmaker, producer in the PGA, Local 600, DOP. I'm joined today by Kathryn Brillhart. We'll start with you, if you don't mind waving, Kathryn.
Hey.
Kathryn is a cinematographer and producer who leverages volumetric capture, visualization techniques, and supervising visual projects effects to enhance projects. For the past decade, she has helped to redefine best practices and standards in virtual production and has advocated for diversity in the film industry through her role on the global board of directors for the Visual Effects Society. Past credits of hers include this small indie you might have heard of called The Mandalorian, Call of the Wild, The One and Only Ivan, and Dr. Doolittle. As well, I'm also introduced Greg. Greg, so I get your last name right. Can you please pronounce your last name for me?
Sure, Ciaccio.
Ciaccio, Greg Ciaccio. He is ETC Ripple Effect executive producer, head of production technologies and post. He's passionate about finding new technology and workflow solutions for the motion picture and television industry. Greg serves as chair of the ASC Motion Imaging Technology Council's Workflow Committee, which includes the ACE's Advanced Data Management and Cloud Architecture subcommittees. Additionally, he is an ASC associate member, board member of the SMPTE Hollywood section, a member of the Television Academy Science and Technology Group, and a founding member of the Digital Cinema Society. All right, this is going to be, I think, a big topic today, and I want to first talk about a project that I just recently worked on, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the projects Kathryn and Greg have worked on. So just to get us started, obviously the pandemic has forced all of us to pivot a little bit and adapt. So now finally I'm able to talk about a 10-episode series I did for Oprah Winfrey Network, where we would send Pelican cases to individual celebrities. I would then light them using a combination of Zoom and Teradek's core technology. And we completed the entire 10-episode series entirely remotely using basically the Cube 755. And the reason I'm starting here is because you're going to hear a lot of crossover. You're going to hear a lot of jargon between the technology that all three of us are utilizing. And between the chat window, we're going to help you all navigate all of this. Also, this is a safe space. There are no dumb questions. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The only time you'll see me ever get angry is if people judge each other, and we're not going to do that here. So first, I think a good place to start might be just how each of you have had to adapt to the current pandemic. Kathryn, why don't we start with you? So how has your work been changing over the last year?
Yeah, well, it's been really interesting. I would say the opportunity to become the director of virtual production on a project like this, like Ripple Effect, that adopted remote workflows, was a huge shift. There weren't a ton of virtual production projects like this in motion before the pandemic happened, and that sort of fast-tracked a lot of this and the need to explore some of this in these techniques. So just having that opportunity in itself, I think, is a reflection of that.
Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that happens in pre-production now. There's a lot that can happen over Zoom. I know there's always been pre-production. We've always had, or for years, had previs. But I think what we're now seeing is a lot more of that work is happening in advance of a production. And so when the time you hit the floor, you're running. You're basically trying to figure things out. I know you've probably seen a lot of webinars or case studies where you show a lot of, set design, working with lighting and grip and electric, and realizing what you can do and what you can't do before they even leave their house. So I think a lot of it's just relying on the tools that we have now, rather than just something that you hope will work. The tools have gotten better to the point where we have to rely on them. And so we're getting to the point where when you do hit a stage, hopefully, if you've done your job, just like architects do in building homes, it all lays out right. So just a lot more off stage.
Has there been resistance early on? I guess either of you can take this, to sort of adapting to the current climate, because I found specifically on my show that there's just a lot of, we get stuck in our ways using sort of current technology, and there was a lot of resistance to working entirely remotely. There were all these concerns about directing, about interacting with the talent, about, really all of those things. And we got to an area where people became more comfortable with it. But why don't you touch on, maybe Kathryn, we can start with you in terms of just early adoption of remote collaboration from your perspective. Was there any resistance?
Yeah. I think it varies per project, just in the sense that different creatives like to set up their creative workflow differently. And I think for those who are used to using visualization techniques and planning ahead and are interested in new tech and the virtual scouting opportunities that like photogrammetry and other techniques of kind of pulling into this space, that might have been an easier transition. But what's nice is that some of those projects have laid groundwork so that creatives who through this experience of the pandemic, who might not be able to work in their traditional way or ways that feel more comfortable to them, they can use these examples as a roadmap for how to use the techniques to their advantage. And what's nice is that there has been development over the last 10 years to make it relatively seamless. Not everything is seamless, but directors can pretty much use some tools that are plug and play to stay engaged with creative.
So just a quick note here. I'm getting messages that there might be some join issues. I am not sure if it's a platform specific thing, but Greg flagged that, and then actually someone else flagged that for me. So if you are currently able to see what we are saying, could you please pop a nice little note into chat, because I'd love to narrow it down to which platforms are having an issue seeing us right now. But we're going to keep going. So Greg, in terms of resistance from sort of the old guard folks around you, was there any to creating, I'm sorry, I'm reading this in real time. YouTube is good, great. So was there initial resistance to any of the technology in terms of the pandemic?
There's always going to be a little resistance, just like there's been resistance in different technologies throughout the years. There are still a lot of filmmakers who like to work where you just capture everything and deal with it later. And there are some that like to craft the look and get it right on set. So there's different workflows. I think part of my challenge at the ASE in running the workflow committee, and we're growing, right? So I know you announced we have an advanced data management committee. There's a cloud architecture committee. ACES for color management is part of what we do is train our constituency. The new filmmakers coming up out of film school, but sometimes they know more because they're at the forefront of what's going on. To them, it's just normal to pick up an iPad and adjust lighting through lighting protocol. So, I think working with various teams. So rather than having camera separate and electric separate and grip separate. It's we're all working holistically now. So that's part of our challenge. Is today when you work on a design for a show, you might use traditional tools. Tomorrow you might be working in NVIDIA's Omniverse or something similar, where you're actually setting up your lights as you see set pieces moving into the volume or the stage. You're setting your lights up. And everything's all happening concurrently as if you were literally on stage. And that is what we're trying to do. Now, that's a pretty big hurdle, right? When we went from film to digital tape, we thought that was a pretty big thing, right? Because we were going into the digital side. And then when Red came out, they were one of the arguably first popular RAW cameras. Everything was different. The DIT position came up. A lot of, a camera didn't know how to deal with these cameras. So there's a lot of things that changed. We're taking this tenfold now. Everything's changing. We're taking what we call, Kathryn, we talk about post-visual effects all the time. It's not post-visual effects anymore. It's visual effects. And they're moving up. Sometimes the older guard gets it because they had to do this years ago. Before digital technology, they had to meet. They had to get all this right. They had to very methodically craft what's going to happen on stage because they only got one shot at it. So I think in some ways we're returning to the old ways.
Yeah, well, and then to just add to that, you inspired me, Greg. It's some of these techniques, I think a lot of these techniques are available to just a new group of people, like the consumer, the student, the prosumer, like visualization and some essence of virtual production have been used for almost 20 years, developed by, Bob Zemeckis and James Cameron and Rob Legato and people who had independent funding, and now we're really seeing a boom and a democratization of a movement that's already been in motion for quite some time.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Kathryn, not to cut you off. So just a quick announcement. Looks like Zoom is back up. All other platforms are good. So if you missed the initial part of this conversation, we're going to make this video available to everyone on Teradek's YouTube at the end. Okay, last programming
I'm going to
note,
say back to one.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I think this might be a good spot here. I'm assuming most of our viewers are visual people, so why don't we queue up video one, Michael? And this is just, Kathryn, maybe you can give us just a little backstory on what video one is. This is on set of Ripple Effect. It's that BTS video.
Okay, sure. Just a little, so the Entertainment Technology Center that's associated with USC Cinematic Arts funds, it gets short films or projects kind of pulled together once every 4 years-ish. And this summer, they executed Ripple Effect. And so the footage that you're seeing is behind the scenes of us on set shooting, I believe, some of the truck sequences for this short film. And we were exploring virtual production workflows, specifically using LED walls, capturing 100% in-camera visual effects. And another side product of the project was, it's not only the short film, but a white paper. So as we're working through and breaking down the creative and constructing the film associated with USC Cinematic Arts funds, I'm sorry, I can hear myself. We're also documenting everything that we're doing and writing best practices and guidelines based on the relationships that we had with vendors and our experience to kind of help lay down the roadmap for how we approach this and how we did this based on the creative challenges that we were solving. And hopefully it's one of the few starting places that other industry leaders or studios could look at and tear it apart or say, I want to try this way, or, oh, it's good to know that this doesn't work and we can try it a different way. So that's kind of the big overview of kind of what you're seeing here.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, that's that LED wall on the right side of the frame.
Yeah. So this is Chris, who was for ICVR, and he is one of our lead VAD team members, which is virtual art department. So he was running content in that specific truck workflow. It was a collaboration between Stargate Studios and ICVR to run content provide camera tracking, set up in-display and multi-user and game engine on the wall. And then you can see clips of the remote, like large monitoring system that Greg and Jane Brem set up on the outside of the stage so that the whole crew could safely monitor what the camera saw on stage. This is, I guess he's walking through some of the previs, and this is actually final content in some ways. Some of these shots are previs and some are final content. So without the audio, it might be a little confusing here, but.
No worries. I think, Michael, we're good to cut away here from video one.
Yeah.
Great. So I want to help define sort of virtual digital production for everybody in the way that we're sort of covering it in this panel. So for me on the OWN show, I was doing primarily live, remote, cloud-based workflow. That was kind of my side of it. The video just covered a few different things though. Previs techniques, and then Kathryn, you tell me if I get any of this wrong. Virtual art department, set scouting, in-camera VFX. We're going to touch on this a little bit later. Obviously, live LED walls, super exciting there. And then, of course, based on the current situation, social distancing protocols. So that video you watched kind of had a bunch of things happening sort of all at once. And the point is that each of those various parts that I just listed off there, I believe that there's things that you can take right now. I mean, that seems like a lot of stuff. I acknowledge there's, 360 video walls, all of these things. There are things that you can take right now and use on your current production from one of those maybe 6 or 7 bullet points that I listed off just right there. So Kathryn, did I do okay there with that list? One double check.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to talk like in broader strokes, the virtual production community is sort of recognizing workflows like visualization, which can be previs, tech-viz, post-viz, safety viz, real-time performance capture. So all of these have real-time elements to them. Hybrid green screen frustum workflows on LED walls, final pixel and camera effects on LED walls, and actually final pixel animation in Unreal Engine as well is included in this space. And to your point, Graham, we focused on 3 elements: the visualization, performance capture, and then final pixel and camera visual effects.
And Greg, I promise we're going to get to you right in a second here, but one more question for Kathryn is, I remember this, honestly, whenever there's sort of emerging technology happening in real time, there's always debate and discussion about the vocabulary that we're using. So can you just give us a couple key words that we're going to talk about over the next, hour or so here? I mean, volumetric capture, things like this. Anything we can prep folks with so they're not thrown off?
Yeah.
Or what debate is happening right now? I mean, I know we discussed this a little bit in the rehearsal. Not to put you on the spot, we can also.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll try to narrow this down a little bit. So some keywords that key things that we'll be talking about that were part of this project are volumetric capture techniques, use combination of like LiDAR scanning and photogrammetry. And we can do a deeper dive later on that. When we were talking about real time on our project, we used Unreal Engine 4.25 and 2.6 on this project. We used the game engine in our visualization and our remote workflows. We also brought that on set using in-display plugins to show our content in real time on the screens. And then we actually had our VAD, our virtual art department teams, in some cases on set, in some cases working remotely, using real-time game engines, running content through the stage operation team system. So those might be the most broad terms. And then we can always kind of dig deeper from there.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there at all. But yeah, so volumetric capture, ingesting a 3D object using some device, right? Essentially?
Yeah.
Game engines.
So there are a variety of different techniques that fall under volumetric capture. So LiDAR would be, you could use a LiDAR scanner like a Faro 350S to capture an environment or a prop, depending on what object you're trying to create. You can digitize an asset using those techniques and recreate that physical asset as a 3D asset and combine the digital and physical world that way, which is important for a production designer to think about as they're designing sets, important for a DP to think about because you're linking your virtual camera and your world in real time as you're doing the production, and sometimes, at least in visual effects, this is so broad. But
yeah,
like,
I know. You
you can use those techniques to combine the camera and your cinematography. But then on this project, we mainly used photogrammetry to not only capture our volumes and our sets before we shot so that we could accurately plan our safety viz and our visualization around the actual resources that we had in terms of space and safety, but we were also able to capture our truck and other key assets in advance, a few while we were on set, to continue like blending the digital and physical world. And the advantage of photogrammetry over LiDAR tends to be that you have high dynamic range textures and photoreal textures that are can be immediately applied to those assets, whereas LiDAR is like focusing on just the geometry.
I remember in the early days, people using Xbox Connects back in the day to
Yep.
to do. Yeah. So again, there's always a tool for doing all of this stuff. So Greg, let's talk workflow. So Kathryn helped us sort of set the stage there with some jargon, so to speak, some key terms.
Sure.
Maybe this is a good time to maybe pull up Miro. What do you think, Greg?
Yeah, sure. Just real quick to end on Kathryn's topic. So one of the things that we had as our a project goal for Ripple Effect is to make sure that any solution that we introduce, where there's a large scale solution, because after all, the ETC in this project reports to the studios, right? And so the studios hope to have best practices and show their filmmakers how to produce television and film. But there's also an indie side. So we have this independent or out of the box solution. So, to Kathryn's point about using LiDAR, there's all kinds of ranges there, all the way to your iPhone 12. So, just like DSLRs have removed the barrier to entry for filmmakers, where now if you can shoot something well, doesn't matter what you have. In the past, it looked amateurish. Now we've got great solutions out there for every budget. When I say every budget, you have to at least have something like this.
$5.
Yes, something. Okay, yeah, I can do that. I can share. Let me go to this share screen here, and I can show the Miro board. Those of you who are not familiar with Miro, let me just get this out of the way, it's a great little online whiteboarding application that's browser-based, so you don't have to have any specific software. So this is our world. It's a great sandbox, and we have a lot of partners that collaborate. So each person has their own frame, and there's a different purpose for each one. One is strictly single line schematics for mainly engineers. And then we have one that basically is a little more of a visual chart that I like to use to kind of show the big picture and what we're trying to do. And again, one of our main goals here is to make sure that we are practicing safe production. So as I started flowing this out, I basically put lines here separating on stage, off stage, and off lot, or as they say, near set or far set, it doesn't really matter. And the reason for this is because we had certain capacities, right? So we started out at XR stage in Pacoima, a fairly large volume with a very large stage. And we wanted to make sure that we respected the filmmakers, the crew. We did have a situation where our director of photography tested positive for COVID days before going on stage. Now, the good news is because we were already using remote workflows as a key tenet to the production, it didn't take a lot of work to really change it. What we did have to do, unfortunately, is we had a whole new crew on the camera side that came in just because of fears, understandably. So there's only so much that we could spring on them at the last second. And keep in mind, a lot of our crew was made up of recently graduated USC students. So again, really talented, but not extremely seasoned for decades of working here. So what we did is we had an A camera, and that was the Arri Alexa LF. We operated that in 4.5K. So basically, it was a raw signal. We were monitoring an HDR. On set, we had just the one main A camera, and then we had a witness camera using a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K camera. You can use all kinds of cameras for crew cams. We use this one. Eric Weaver, our other executive producer, already owned it, so why not? And basically, we were able to take the A camera. This is a shot of two of our main actors in the truck. And so you can see all of the metadata that's on the screen as well. Here's another shot, just a different set, same stage of the interior of the dining room. And then over here, you can see this is actually Lux Machina, and you can see the environment. You'll see the other environment. It's quite a bit bigger, but regardless, we're able to capture that using the Teradek Bolt. And it's nice having this bonded cellular backpack, because even in situations where we had a lot of bandwidth, we had hiccups. We had internet go down. We had bandwidth contention. Someone's using the bandwidth. Hey, I thought we had the only dedicated line here. I don't know what happened. So the nice thing about that is it doesn't matter what's happening, right? So you could have 2, 3, 4 cellular services all bonded together, and we did not go down at all using that technology, which is fantastic.
And Greg, if you don't mind, if I can pause you for a moment here while you're on this chart.
Please.
So if someone from the CS team can put the bonded backpack information that I know we have on the Teradek side up in chat, that would be amazing. And then just before you go on, Greg, I wanted to touch on the OWN series, because what you're looking at here, this is a larger scale virtual production, right? So I would send, my AC team would send 5 Pelican cases to Usher, essentially, right? Once these Pelican cases show up at Usher's location, we had a few choices about how are we going to connect to just the internet. And this is where the bonded backpack comes in. And so we could use bonded nodes. You can separate SIM cards within your different nodes, right? So if you're in a situation where Sprint is more prevalent than T-Mobile, is more prevalent than whoever, this is giving you multiple ways to connect to the internet beyond, of course, Wi-Fi or hardwiring into a router or something like that. In terms of a witness cam, we would use Zoom and a laptop for our witness cam, as we got our C300 Mark II plugged in to the Cube 755, and then that would give me a feed right through the Teradek Core system onto my iPad. And then from there, I would be able to light the interview with Usher's help or Wyclef Jean's help or one of these sort of celebrity stakeholders that had to then sort of light themselves. And they got over that initial sort of shock of having 5 large Pelican cases show up on their front door. But this just shows you how I'm just using a piece of the workflow that Greg is discussing to then DP all 10 episodes of this series. So, okay, sorry, Greg, back to you.
No, that's awesome. So very similarly, the ASC had a series that Jay Holden produced where they did the same thing. They sent these kits out, and it's great. You got to make them as plug and play as possible, and that's a great challenge, I think. So as Kathryn was mentioning, we had Dane Brem and his company Syntegral that supplied the DIT gear. That's another thing that I'd love to talk about at some point with regard to how the DIT role is expanding. There wasn't a DIT, back in 2003, 2002 or so, and then that role popped up because of an important need. Well, we're at another juncture in time where there are further needs above and beyond just an imaging technician on set. But in this case,
honestly, Greg, that's a great lead into the sort of obvious question here that I know people are going to ask is, looking at this chart, whose job is this? Because early on, 7 months ago, when we were planning out my show, we're like, is this an AC thing? Is this a DIT thing? Is this an entirely different role, which I think maybe you're about to argue for, that we're not thinking about? But putting together this workflow, who is the ultimate department leader for what you're showing us here today? In your opinion,
right.
I mean, there's some debate.
Yes. So listen, I'm working with Dane, I'm working with Jamie Metzger. There are others out there, some DITs that have been doing this for a very long time. They see what's going on. They've been doing this work for a long time. Yes, it's gone and it's evolved, but now we're in a revolution time. And so what we have to look at, especially putting on my ASC hat, is yes, if you're doing a sporting event and you're doing a nonfiction, a reality event, yes, no problem. If you want to have those signals go out to the world and everyone's okay with it, that's great. But if you're working on a motion picture or a television series, that's high-end scripted, and you want to make sure you still maintain authorship of the image, that's probably not a good thing. So we have to make sure that we can protect the image, right? And that's part of the DIT's job, is to protect the creative intent of the cinematographer and the director and the rest of the creatives. And now we have a situation where we've got signals going everywhere, right? So that's part imaging technician, that's part networking engineer. So this will all be fleshed out in the coming months. But what it's looking like is that there'll be a production technologist on stage. That could be a DIT like Dane, who can do that in his sleep, and is now moving into the next area, which is, okay, I've got the camera, I've got these other, maybe I have 2 or 3 witness cameras, maybe I even have a GUI from Unreal Engine, maybe I have something else. How do I get those all together and send those out and make sure that the image that people are seeing at home matches what we're seeing on stage? And that's important. It's not just about getting something out for performance. Of course, as we know that a lot of people carry iPads, which, the most color accurate thing that you can give anyone is an iPad, because there's no color adjustments on it. All you can do is adjust for ambient lighting with the brightness control. So a lot of it is just making sure that the signal is correct. So we're looking at it as a production technologist. And I know a lot of people say, well, who supplies that? Mm-hmm. I personally think it's part of the production. I think the production should hire that person. There's a lot of things to consider. You need to do a site survey. You need to see, okay, well, what kind of signals are we sending around? Oh, we have these remote heads. Oh, we have this safety buddy system that tracks our whereabouts. Okay, so I need a robust Wi-Fi 6 system. I know what to do. You get that installed. So there's a site survey. So I think that person is going to handle all of that networking and technology.
Greg, quick question for you. Angel Solis here asks, could you send us these workflow charts? Is there a way that you can pop this in social or in chat, or maybe send it to one of the CS team here, or just like a big wide screenshot of some of the things you're talking about?
Yeah, I can save this panel here, which is called, this is the physical production. Yeah, absolutely, I can do that. And then, we also have, just for, most people don't want to dive too deep in this, but some people do, is we have details on the cart. So as I mentioned, we're all HDR over here. I think it's important that, oopsie, sometimes you have to be careful with these buttons. It's important to have our master imaging standards. So we were working at ACES 1.2, the very latest Academy color encoding system color management. And we were all in UHD for television and 4K for theatrical. Monitoring in P3, HDR with 1,000 nit reference. We had a Sony X300 on stage, which is the cream of the crop. That is still the current reference monitor. We also had an LG OLED C9 series, fantastic. We were able to visually match them. And again, for safety purposes, we made sure that just those of us, including Kathryn and David Brillhart, our DP, virtual production side, that we can see everything that the camera is seeing in the mastering environment. Everyone else, basically, all of the crew heads, can safely distance themselves around the large 65-inch LG OLED. We had a couple of these. We had other ones in other areas too, so that other crew heads that didn't have to be right on stage can also see what's going on with the same level of image fidelity.
And quick sidebar here, Greg, for those watching. So Small HD has a new line of production 4K monitors that are meant for exactly this purpose. They have OLED, non-OLED, and then in various sizes. So maybe we can pop that into the chat links right now, but it's meant for exactly this.
And by the way, things are changing so quickly. So even though we shot this just months ago, already the Teradek products have matured. The Small HD products have matured. I think that monitor was coming out right when we were shooting. And so some of the important things that we look for in remote monitoring, obviously color fidelity, bit rate, so the compression needs to be very good. And also super important is latency. And we'll talk about that. We had another situation that required the director, we pushed 4 days because that happens. and the director was going to be on the East Coast in a wedding that she was actually in. It wasn't something that she was just attending. And so okay, then that came across kind of like, oh crap, how am I going to tell him this? And I said, oh, no worries, we have a way to figure that, to address that. And we used the link right off the Tear Deck through the viewer app, and it worked great. We were about 2.5 seconds of delay.
Bolt 4K sends 4K obviously, and also wireless HDR. I know you didn't have access to that technology on this one, but since you have such a HDR centric workflow, Bolt 4K would have been perfect for that.
Absolutely, and John, who was amazing at Tear Deck in making sure that we had whatever, even if he had to grab a backpack for the Emmy Awards and bring it right back, he did. Drove all over town as well. So we definitely want to take advantage of those newer systems because you know, HDR is becoming the norm. I know a lot of people still kind of shy away from it, but we definitely believe it's something that has to be viewed on set. I could go back and forth. Dana and I could basically toggle, as we did for every single setup. We toggle between HDR and SDR to make sure that the lighting choices, that the panel, because remember, this is new technology, right? We're not everyone's doing HDR work on LED panels. So we wanted to make sure that whatever our eye sees, that the camera sees, that we know what the camera's seeing, both in HDR and SDR.
Mm-hmm. And look, I think HDR is coming too, right? For consumers, yes. HDR is here, whether we want that or not. It's here. So.
Well, that's a whole other discussion about HDR. How HDR does HDR have to be?
It's a scale.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
For those of us who are older, when CDs came out, you don't need to blast your ears out, right? It's about dynamics. It's about the quiet passages and the loud passages and the difference between them. That's what HDR is about.
Okay, and so again, as Greg, you're going through this, I want to make the key point here. So as you look at this workflow chart for our viewers out there, you can take parts of this. You don't have to do all of this. Your best practices are your best practices. So at this point, I'd like to put that blog article about near and far remote monitoring, which is sort of the bottom part of, he's showing you there with the cursor, into chat. So there's a bunch of different products from Tear Deck that allow you to be near and close to the camera team. For me, again, I use Cube 755 and Core. Core sent it to, Greg just mentioned how great the iPad is, sent it to my iPad. And then I got a really great sense of what was coming right out of camera. I think now, Greg, it might be a good time to talk with Kathryn about LED walls in camera practical effects, because look, in fact, Michael, if we can get video 2 ready, Kathryn, I don't want to make you narrate, and you tell me if that's not a great idea, but if you can talk folks through some of the things they're about to see in video number 2 that Michael is queuing up, because I imagine we have some Mandalorian fans here. Am I wrong?
Yeah, sure. I can't speak to the video having been on their set, but I can say, having seen this, what we wanted to show is just the Mandalorian coverage of what their LED volume looked like, just to get a sense of scope. What you're looking at is a project that had an unlimited budget, had, you know, in some relative terms, like unlimited time to kind of previs this and put the story together and figure out how to make the technology, even with its limitations, work for them. But what's really cool about some of these images, or, you know, they had just kind of shown a mini example of the camera, the virtual camera frustum, showing that the physical camera and the virtual camera were paired on that LED volume and optimizing the area of the screen that the physical camera was shooting. So that was an illustration that you saw. And then when you're looking at the images that they are shooting with on their screen, their environments were created using photogrammetry scans and photographic capture of environments that were built, and they had tons of time to build those environments before going into their shoot days. And then, you know, Mandalorian is Mandalorian and it's ILM running the show, so they have a stellar post-visual effects team. So at least in season 1, you could definitely say that in addition to those in-camera visual effects that they were capturing and the in-camera reflections that they were able to achieve in shots like that, there were a ton of post-visual effects enhancements, blending the digital and physical world, and adding animation and atmosphere and all that. So
why do creatives, the cinematographer, I know you're a cinematographer, why do actors, why do they like capturing effects in camera?
Well, something that's really innovative about incorporating LED wall workflows into our toolkit as filmmakers is, maybe up until this point, we've been using green screen, which, I don't think is ever really going to go away. It has its place. It's very useful, but it has its own issues like green spill or the whole team not really being able to see the creative intent of the project as you're shooting on set. So what the LED wall technology and this goal to achieve in-camera visual effects and pull some of that work into the front end of your pipeline, it has a lot of benefits that we're starting to see, and Mandalorian really showed this. So like one would be like the process helps communicate creative intent throughout the entire process. So everyone's on the same page. That helps create more collaboration in the development phase of the film, and keeps key collaborators like the DP, production designer, visual effects supervisor, director, all making decisions together that are going to be executed down the pipeline, instead of maybe more traditional workflow where people are kind of passing a creative baton in a linear way. It's a little bit more holistic from the beginning. And I would say Mandalorian is also a special case because it's episodic, right? So there is more payoff from a budgetary standpoint, building digital sets that can be reused, and over a series of seasons. They don't have to be stored in a physical stage. They are in a hard drive, essentially. So you can pull up different designs and sets in one location, and you're scheduling, you're kind of reducing the scope and scale of travel for your whole team, which is nice in a COVID time or post-pandemic time, because you're giving a little bit more flexibility to what you can do within a single location. And then from a different perspective as well, and kind of in that visualization space, creatives and that team of collaborators can iterate faster at a lower cost early on in the project. So for example, if you needed to pre-visualize or make the film before you made the film so that you could sell the film to the studio or prove that it was safe or kind of put all that architecture together, it's a much lower cost to do that in real time in a game engine. And it doesn't require as much of a cash flow just to get the project started. So, and then I guess the cherry on top is actors can see what's going on around them in the LED screen as well.
Yeah, yes, actors, cinematographer, everybody, all the stakeholders on set. And let's talk about I think I know your answer to this. Should the post, let's keep the post name just for a second. Post VFX team, should they be allowed on set during production? What are the benefits of having these people there? And I'll tell you one real quick one. I did a Ubisoft project real recently where I had the VFX supervisor on set with me, and I said, I have no idea what's out this window. And he held up his phone and he's like, this is what's outside the window. And I'm like, my lighting is all terrible. And I changed everything. And that's was one of the tiny anecdote there. But Kathryn, should VFX people be on set during production?
Oh yeah, totally. Yes. And I mean, the Visual Effects Society, anybody who's a visual effects professional, it's funny that the mentality from the visual effects community has always been, it's not something that is relegated to post. It's like virtual production. It's covering a wide variety of skill sets. It covers every aspect of our industry from prep to post. But to your point specifically, yeah, of course, every production, whether it's virtual or not, should have their visual effects team playing a role in key decisions in development. And what these real-time workflows do is allow everyone to kind of, like you were saying with your phone example, visualize that creative intent together and kind of like, I guess, be a proactive part of that puzzle instead of relying on somebody like a visual effects producer to be kind of like tying that all together. You can have a director start that discussion with each of their key department heads independently, in a sense, because they're able to show that creative vision and kind of iterate and change it live on set, which is great.
Which is true collaboration, honestly. I mean, it's kind of purest form too. Everyone is at the table, so to speak. Greg, so we've been talking a lot about this LED panel technology, and I have a question here from Nick Hill. What is the indie filmmaker side of this, right? So we just showed The Mandalorian, the budget's unlimited. And then you mentioned to me, Greg, previously that you see all sorts of creative stuff coming out of the community that informs even some of the things that you guys do.
Yeah, what I would do is get on the Facebook pages. There's, Matt Workman has a great page for virtual production. You see a lot of people out there that as we were talking about the other day, they don't know what they should know and shouldn't know. And I can't tell you how many things I've seen that look like it was $1 million production. They said, "Hey guys, what do you think of this? Is this good?" And you're like, "Is this good? This is amazing. There's no way. Okay, who really worked on this? You're setting us up." And then there's a couple out there that actually show you at the end. They'll show all the different pieces, and it's one person in their bedroom. So there are a lot of things you can do. Now, when it comes to giant walls, listen, walls are expensive, but you don't need a big volume for everything. One of the things, Stargate, Sam Nicholson's company, was out there, and in a lot of the car process shots that he's done, what he does is panels, right? So you take a bunch of your name here, TVs, 4K, 8K, whatever, you stick them out windows, and with the proper tracking, it looks great, right? You're not going to do that in front of a 90-foot wide, volume for a train shoot. You're just going to put them where the windows are. So it's really how you approach it. As Kathryn mentioned, you have to design the shots. There is no cookie cutter, right? What we work on as far as standards are modules that are standardized that allow for the communication, but every single job is different and should be treated that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be the job of the technologist to help figure that out.
Well, and directors have there's a technology side of the DGA of every guild, every association. So it's a matter of attending these kind of events and others and diving deeper into it and seeing what works right for you.
Yeah. So Kathryn, game engines might seem a little bit scary to some filmmakers out there because it's just not something they're used to working with. And you've previously touched on just Unreal being used for previs, for environments themselves on LED walls, things of that nature. So can you talk a little bit more in depth about how game engines are being utilized in sort of modern virtual production?
Yeah, sure. It's a cool moment working with these game engine platforms because they are centralizing a lot of different visual effects tools and digital camera tools and editorial tools, kind of all within one program, which is the gaming world. And Epic Games and Unity both have so much documentation about how to use their software. So if you're somebody who's interested in being boots on the ground and kind of learning all of those tools yourself, what's cool is that it's free right now. There's an open source community around it, and you can be as involved with the process as you want. And then on the other hand, like if you're a DP and you see value in having a previs experience, but you don't want to be on the box and you're like more intuitive, you could use like a Glassbox Studios project with a visualization artist that you partner with who is on the box that could help you run a digital virtual camera like an iPad system. You could, if depending on the budget of your project, even if it's an indie project, if your creative team has decided that's a way that you'd like to architect your project and a step you want to include, you could hire on a sliding scale a heavy hitter like Halon or Third Floor or Proof or Pixo or some of these companies that are doing previs, and they could work with you. You could use their tools that are plug and play for DPs and directors, where they have spent like over 10 years developing pipeline tools that are integrated in their system to make the process super intuitive for you so that you're not thinking about what they're doing in the background. Of course, like then you're starting to talk about a project with a little bit more of a budget, but you have this wide range of possibility. Or you could work with them on have a consulting session with them if you were trying to do something on your own. And as Greg said, all the Facebook support, just other users who are kind of trying to solve the same thing. I hope that answers the question.
No, it does. It does. But so
because it's like game engines are now like in this, they can help you with the visualization and architecting, but then they also show up on set. And like maybe even to segue a little bit more into Greg's workflow discussion as well, like it requires like a networking person, and computer language is now on set. Computer troubleshooting is kind of now part of your reality as a DP and a director and a VP soup. Like there were moments where I was so glad that we had even our limited time running all the test shoots before we executed our final shots, because something that we were learning together, but also had to really communicate with our assistant director was, okay, when the screen looks like this, the VAD team and the stage operators are just solving this 5-minute problem. But if we see this type of error on the screen, it might be an hour. And so learning how to, I guess us having the time to learn what those challenges were so that we could communicate them with the AD, so that we could have a game plan going into the shoot, so that it wasn't like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Why is the screen down? Because, the flow on set is set the frame, set your mise en scène and everything to the frame, get every actors blocked, and then execute the shoot. But when your production design goes away and you're not framed up on anything, it really shuts things down. So like if your screen shuts down, if it overheats, if somebody like from the VAD team switches content when you didn't ask them to, but it shuts down the visual image, and it's because they're helping, or they just had to restart the system because they were experiencing a computer issue. It's kind of working out like those teamwork kinks as well on the set before you get
these are always my fears with just brand new sort of out of the box technology, right? Is we set up expectations, we get to set, we haven't had the time to do the work before we get to the set, whatever it is. And then you get like a, Microsoft error message in the middle of the background of the shot, right as the key moment hits in the scene. So look, this goes back to something we've said on like every CS Presents is on set mid shot is not the time to be figuring this stuff out. You need to have your workflow figured out in advance. And along those lines, Greg, how do you vet a new workflow? How are you doing testing for this stuff? Is this on your own time? Is this part of your work for a specific organization? How does that all factor in? Because telling production, hey, I need to get a bunch of computer programmers together in a room and we all need to work on the clock for like 2 weeks. Is that cool? Seems like kind of a hard conversation to have.
Well, listen, the timing was right? Because some of us were not working during COVID, so we had the time to do this. But absolutely, I mean, a lot of it is drawing on the experiences that Kathryn and I have, right? We've been doing, I've been doing remote color since 2003. So there's a lot of things we've been doing remote. We've had camera remotes, right? When's the last time you saw an AC up at the lens? Like there's a lot of things that we've already had. We were just going to the next level. And so working with people like Dane and others who are progressive in the technology side and see where things are going, have a pretty good idea and have tested out components of these. And then we basically tie it into an entire workflow. And we do, we whiteboard it on Miro. We say, hey, this should make sense, right? If I feed you XYZ into ABC, that should work, right? And then we test it. And sometimes we find out it doesn't work. So for all of our planning, we have to have an A, a B, and a C plan. And trust me, we had to go to the C plan a couple times. there was a situation where someone said, oh, by the way, there's a Sundance deadline we have to submit. So I didn't have the capabilities at the time. So it was USB stick, driving down to the editor's house in Hollywood, handing it to him through a gate. So that happens. But in fact, our first stage had 35 megabits of bandwidth. You can imagine I've got more at home. So yes, it's a great stage. There's only so many volumes that were available, right? They're all new, and they hadn't yet got their contracted bandwidth up yet. So we had to deal with that as well. So luckily we've been doing remote dailies for a long time. So we did that. We had the daily system on location at our facility, so we could just walk the files over, and then we had the dailies operator basically dial in KVM style. And that's one of the other things I know, Kathryn, we were talking about earlier on the LED walls and all that. The tools are changing rapidly. So for those of you who haven't read the Movie Labs 2030 vision, and hopefully we can put that in the chat, that's a fantastic effort driven by Movie Labs and the studios. I'll be producing a panel for SMPTE later on this month, basically about the 2030 vision and what that means. Software-defined workflows, and the idea is you move the data to a central place, and then you give access to others to use that data. So you're not sending heavy data all over the place, and you can better control access by user, by time window, whatever you want. So that's something that's really important to note too. That's changing. There's a lot of things changing all at the same time. So it might be sometimes tough to keep up with, but that's an important one.
I mean, that's got to get a little exhausting when, your goal is to optimize everything all of the time. When do you decide to pick a brand new tool? Do you give it a couple firmware updates before you throw it into the middle of production? Or are you just always testing?
So the most successful and oft working editors and colorists are the ones that are on the oldest versions of software, because they can't afford any downtime. It's the indie film out of town that's like, hey, this is the latest version, I guess I'll upgrade, because if they go down, it's not as big a deal. So yes, that is a constant issue, right? So we have lots of there are things we do. We don't ever upgrade the industry until we make sure we're all on the same page. Kathryn had to do that with Unreal Engine. Okay, what are we on? We're on 4.25. All right, we're locking that version. What's the sub build? No more updates. Automatic updates off. Like, there's a lot of things. You can go home after a day of shooting on Thursday, come in Friday morning, and something doesn't work because it did an overnight, update. Yep. So that's an issue, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, these are, I worked contract for a video game company for about a year, and these are all things we thought about during that process. So it's interesting the kind of crossover between those two mediums that are happening. Kathryn, this is a question from Boris. What are the main bottlenecks using the LED wall in your opinion? So we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but are you ever key lighting with a LED wall? Is there ever any different flicker issues at different frame rates? Are you ever able to see the seams in the floor and things like this? Just little questions along those lines that I get all the time from people.
Yeah, I mean, yes to all of those things.
Okay, great.
But yeah, so I guess, but like for bottlenecks, I'll try to think of 3. And it's funny because, I could go super nuanced with it. I'd say for each setup, you're going to have your own unique bottlenecks. But in general, I felt like over Moray, because Moray is relatively solvable intuitively while you're on set, you have a lot of physical tools that you can use to eliminate that issue. Scan lines and banding, and making sure that your system's calibrated, devices are profiled and gen locked. That can bottleneck you if you don't have enough time on the front end of your project to get that set up, to test it and make sure that everything's ready to execute your final. And just to talk about that as a bottleneck in general, you don't plan a shoot the same way that you would plan, and then I'm just talking about virtual production with LED walls right now. You wouldn't plan to go on set and execute the shoot by just saying, okay, we've got all of our actors and elements ready. We're going to bring it to set this one day, set it up and do it. You have to plan X amount of time in advance of your shoot based on the scope of the creative that you're pulling off to profile devices, calibrate your system, work through your color management on set with your volume and your stage. If you're just talking stage, you need time to get your volume and your panels and your stage set up and working so that you know how to interact with it as a DP. You know how you are going to set up lighting with it as a DP and what your limitations are in the architecture of that volume and its processing power and what color you're going to be seeing. In relation to the creative that you have. So there's kind of that component, but then you also need time to have your production designer install the design that they are going to have, and there is some give and take with that in the screen and making sure that the virtual and digital assets really do match up, because there's planning it virtually and there's the plan, then there's executing that and making sure that you have time to tweak do the final tweaks between the virtual world and physical world while you're on set with your virtual art department, maybe on set doing those final tweaks with you. And that's usually this departmental collaboration that I was mentioning before, where you have your production designer, your DP, your visual effects supervisor, your director, looking at this big picture that's coming together in front of the lens and making sure that all those components are selling to the camera.
Yeah, because like with any technology, it requires a certain level of comfort from everyone, and in every possible crew position, and having that kind of pre-planning leads to that level of comfort with everyone. For example, me showing up day one, there's an LED wall I've never worked with before. It's a VFX team I've never worked with before. I would shoot with a prime 135 at T1.5 because I'd be so scared of what the screen is doing.
Yeah. Well, that would be my advice, the producer, don't plan to have your DP or camera department show up on set the day that you're executing. Like, plan to kind of plan like maybe several days in advance to kind of like let everyone readjust their virtual plan and adjust their plan to what's really happening on set. And that's a little bit, so it's a bit slower of a startup to get you into production, but measure twice, cut once, and it'll pay off.
Yeah, well said. So this is a question I think I'm going to take to you, Greg, first. Kathryn, maybe you want to jump in a little bit later. But Daryl Augustine asks, following up on the Indie LED question, is there a workflow worth considering? Okay, so there's some specific questions about cameras here that I'm going to skip past because, again, testing is required. But here's the part of the question I want to touch on. Is there a step-by-step progress that someone can do towards an LED wall? And what I feel like Daryl's asking here is there an indie version of this where I can set this up in my garage? Is there some self-driven aspect of this? Because, I mean, this kind of technology, it can be a television behind somebody in a close-up in a car. I mean, that's right. Step one, right?
Yep.
Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, you can do that. There's, as Kathryn mentioned earlier, green screen is still fine, right? You can do live comps. In fact, when we do shots where something may not sell it, because, let's face it, when you watch The Mandalorian, you realize that this is the A of the A team, right? And they can develop their own technology. There's probably 99 ways it looks wrong on stage and only one way it looks right from that specific, look through the camera at that moment with the right adjustments. So it's a lot of testing, right? So you could set up something in your house. When you're doing a green frustum, for instance, as I was saying, you're not seeing what's going on. You've got a green screen behind you. Well, it's still green screen. You can still replace that later on. But the other 80% around you is the scene. So if you're trying to react off of the environment, you can still do that and have that green in the background. That's the same thing at home. You can basically use a green screen at home. You can't, if you don't obviously have a space. No one's going to afford on the indie side a giant volume. These are $3, $4, $5 million spaces. So when we're talking about LED volumes, it's really not for the indie, but there are other ways to accomplish things through that. There's complete CGI environments. We're getting so photoreal. For those of you who have seen Soul and other productions like it, we're getting so close to photoreal that you can't even tell.
And Greg, you kind of touched on something about a minute back here, is that, you use a little green screen, you use maybe a monitor for the close-up or what have you, is, I think, personally, the best effects is a combination of a few different ideas, right? Is you have some practical sort of mid-stage, elements like a rock or whatever, or a combination. Then maybe the left side is green screen for a specific reason, or it's a combination of different elements. Always, to me, makes the most believable stuff.
Yeah, well, when you're designing visual effects shots and you're designing shots, that it's the foreground, midground, and background design that really pulls you into a shot. And when you're thinking about that spatially on a set, you've got the foreground, midground, and background physically, which is your LED panel, and there's always a focus plane behind that. But then, in a sense, that LED panel is a midpoint inside that 2D frame. So really thinking about space, beyond what your camera is just capturing, and thinking about the design of that content in the depth of that content is really important.
I mean, and that's exactly right. You were talking about the camera earlier. It does all factor in. It's all part of the design. To be honest, a lot of people say, okay, let's set up a virtual environment. What do we need? Okay, well, you'll need this panel with this design and this camera. Well, that's only because that's what people have been using, right? So there's not like 100 different examples where you can draw upon. So people tend to go with what works. So right now, that's the Arri Alexa LF camera. That's what the Mandalorian uses. It's a Rowe Black Pearl 2.6 pitch screen. But one of the efforts that Kathryn and I are involved in now with the ETC is a LED wall virtual production testing event, which we're getting ready to do, and we've been meeting about. And basically, one of the first things is profiling the panels, right? What test patterns do we use? What live action do we use? How do we get to a set of best practices so somebody can walk on stage and automatically, like you said, okay, I know I need a 135 for this. Wait a minute, I'm on a full frame sensor, so that means that our wall is, it's 22 feet tall and 80 feet wide, but my edge of my set is 20 feet in front of that. Those things will start to become common knowledge, and you'll just off the cuff, rather than going, I don't know what it's going to look like, let's test it out. Yeah. You'll know exactly what type of sensor, what type of lens, what type of everything. So it's all in the balance, and it just comes from experience.
Yeah, you actually asked a question. What sort of standards and norms exist? I mean, this is Kathryn and Greg, everybody. They're working on creating these standards and norms. So please follow them, because they're actively testing all of this out. Sorry, Kathryn, did you want to hop in there on what Greg was saying, or no?
Sure. It was just like a one-liner that also, like, maybe on a sliding scale for indie budget, this is where you could tap into a company like Halon or Proof or Third Floor or Pixo or whoever to tech viz. Like, let's say that you have key shots where you're not using virtual production for your whole film, but it's key shots, or like this big chase sequence, or like a sequence that is really important. Well, you could do a pass at it yourself and come to the table with storyboards so that you're not burning money figuring out creative with that company. But you could say, this is my idea and this is how I'd like to execute it. Can you help me tech viz and like show me where my plan is going to fail right now, so that I can iterate a new version of this before I get to set, and use their experience, problem solving. So that's just another form of consultation that you could do before, a big indie film, like, chase sequence or something that you're planning.
Sure. And like the most popular things, everybody, to previs obviously are high motion scenes. You were talking about chases, things like that. And Kathryn, you make a really great point about burning money. Do the math on, is figuring out the creative in the room with the following people a good idea from a budgetary perspective? And maybe it is. And then, good, you have a great budget. Okay, question from Angel here. Can you? This is for you, Greg. Can you talk about a little more about just specifically Daly's workflow and Ripple Effect, or anything that you've noticed?
To be honest, the Daly's workflow is fairly straightforward. We use Fifth Kind as our asset management system, and that's important, as Kathryn was mentioning. It's important now that the operations are centralized, the media is largely centralized. It's important to have all the assets centralized, because the end goal at the end of the day is to have all of anything that you create in pre flow through to post. So you could call it dailies, but basically people are viewing this Fifth Kind platform, and it allows you to see everything from scripts to storyboards to animatics to everything. Dailies, of course, is included. Dailies was fairly straightforward. The material came off of the cards. We checked the file integrity with the ASC MHL, which is our media hash list. It provides a manifest and data integrity to make sure that all the files are really where they should be. And then the Technicolor basically would KVM through their Burbank facility into their cart. I actually have some visual aids, if you don't mind. Can I throw something up?
Absolutely.
All right. So just jumping over to, so that is the dailies. Let me just put that full screen so you guys can see that. So that's Chris, our data manager. And so basically we have the daily system in the kitchen, which, hey, everything, all parties congregate in the kitchen, right? It's the coolest place in a hot summer day where it got to 110 degrees and beautiful downtown Pacoima. And it's also quiet. It keeps the fans, out of the range of the microphones. So basically we would copy the data over to the cart. We use LTO8 for backup, for archive. We use these Seagate drives. If you see these beautiful glowing magenta line drives, those are 64 terabyte SSDs that can go between our data center on the lower right. You can see Equinix to the right, and to the lower right you can see our remote chassis that receives the data. Technicolor would come in basically around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on the shoot day, process all the dailies, make sure that everything was where it needed to be. The editor can access the DNX HR material, and voila, there you go.
Great. So I'm a little behind on questions here, Greg and Kathryn. So maybe you can help me out with a few of these. We'll
Sure.
bang through them here. So anonymous attendee asks, I think maybe a helpful way to talk about scaling would be to break it down, moving away from an indie in your garage level, maybe to small production with green screen to mid-level commercial production with a single volume wall. No Unreal Engine 4, explaining challenges, considerations, and budgets, even just as a rough estimate. Okay, that's interesting. Is there a mid-level budget number that we can throw out for this? It's always hard to be specific. I mean, everything's different. Anybody have?
I wouldn't throw out a number with
Yeah, it's hard.
information, but maybe can you throw me some other specifics from the question to hit?
Yeah, I mean, single volume wall is in a mid-level production. Okay, anonymous attendee, maybe if you could do some follow-up there on that questions, challenges, considerations. I mean, we've talked about a lot of those. I mean, these are multi-million-dollar environments with multiple walls.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
it's tough. I would think for anything medium budget, I would definitely plan visualization into your workflow, because that will ultimately save you money as you're going through your process. And depending on what your creative is and what the problems are that you're solving, if you're using LED wall workflows, I mean, if the intent is to capture final in-camera visual effects that are not going to be changed in any way really in post, sticking to your guns on that and making sure that all the prep work that you do sets you up for success, and making sure that the whole team understands that that's the philosophy going through the process. We took a very tight stance on that on ripple effect, and it paid off in the end. And then I think the other thing would be, if it isn't the whole production, just in those key moments where you need to finally execute, the more prep you do in advance, and the more you have, the more you've had time to iterate and like throw out your ideas before you get to that final shoot, the more you'll maximize your time when you're there on the stage and have that perfect like aha moment where things are coming together.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's such a scale, guys, too. It's hard to be like, it'll cost X to do this.
You know, like I couldn't tell you what problems you're gonna face when you get there, or like set up your volume at your stage. Like, who knows if
Sure.
Yeah, and reach out to a company like Stargate with Sam Nicholson, who has a variety of different solutions. It's not like you're going, okay, I want to go to a stage. Okay, the stage is going to cost you $100K a month.
Yeah.
Here it is. Show up at 8 a.m. Like, no, you know, if you go to someone like Sam, he'll say, okay, what are you trying to achieve? And say, okay, you know what? I can do that with these, you know, displays here and with a rear projection here and with this there. If you're doing a tight shot with a background where you're not seeing a huge expanse, you don't need a big volume.
Yeah. Okay. Stephen Williams asked, from a producer standpoint, this is a technology heavy workflow. How can I compare traditional versus virtual production workflow for budgeting strategies? And can you mix and match techniques? Well, of course you can mix and match techniques all day, Stephen, but in terms of budgeting, I mean, a lot of these are like trying to get us to name numbers, unfortunately. Are there some best practices for looking at money spend from the producer perspective, guys,
Well,
that you could share?
I'll try to talk about like money as it relates to time and resources. That might be as specific as I can get. When you're planning like a virtual production like Ripple Effect, you want to have, you know, we probably should have had closer to 20 weeks of prep on the front end, but we had 6 to 8 before we got to our shoot. And we had a shoot day maybe like once a week over a month, and we had these rounds of like testing, like maybe 7 days of testing before each shoot. So when you're thinking about that as a producer, you know, you need time on the front end of your project to get through development. And I include in development, like really having that clear vision of the story and like making sure that by the end of the development period, you've got a very clear vision from the director. And for a ripple effect workflow, for an in-camera visual effects workflow, that vision needs to be, you need to have a version of it storyboarded. You need to have a lookbook. You need to have the visionary with like the vision Bible saying this is what the starting place is. Because by the time you get to pre-production, your visualization team and your visual effects team, who are now going to be working together with you to help start iterating and unfolding and unpacking that vision and turning that into a reality, need that direction. And if you are a director that's putting more of that responsibility, or like maybe working with a visualization company to develop your story, then that is going to increase your budget because they're time and materials. Yeah. You can hire somebody all day to help you figure out what's in your head, but that's going to cost you money. So the more that you can come to the table with the vision, and then, if you see pre-production as more of that budget execution point, pre-production is where, like, if you have 4 buckets of money, right? You have like $1 sign, $2 signs, $3 signs, like $4 or $5 signs. By the time you get to like post visual effects, you're like moving some of those dollar signs into the pre-production bucket and spreading that out into production a little bit more. So, if you're an independent film that's doing this on a tight budget, well, hopefully you had a budget for visual effects anyway. And it's not, it's not necessarily I need more money. Maybe it is. It's I'm moving some of this money here so that I can create a non-destructive asset workflow to get to this point and streamline the handoffs between visual effects. So, you'll probably based on technology today, I'd say you're gonna get a closer photoreal result, the photoreal results that I think that you would expect out of this technology. The workflow is having a visual effects company and visualization company working together to flesh out what's going to be on the wall. Maybe you have a visualization previs level of quality by the time you get to production, maybe not, depends on how you've planned this project. But you could theoretically shoot with assets that aren't completely photoreal, and then based on how you designed your workflow, replace those assets later with your visual effects, high-end, high-res assets that have been constructed along the way because you've reallocated some of that time in the front end and it's going through your whole pipeline so that they meet and then what you have from this virtual production workflow is post-viz coming off your set as dailies. That's going straight to the editor. So there's no guesswork. There's no compositor necessarily like tweaking the shots before it goes to editorial. Again, your creative sort of impacts that in your workflow. But people who are already in visual effects workflows are seeing this style of working with LED walls as a way to bypass the unknown of the green screen. Everyone can we can reconstruct how production and visual effects work as a team throughout this entire process. Essentially, I mean, I don't know.
No.
I will say this. This is real important. And I had personal example of this. Years ago, I was working on a film. It was one of the first films to be shot with a Sony HD Cam F900. And at the end of the process, I said, oh my God, you guys must be so happy. You don't have to do a home video version of this, right? Back then you had entire different divisions that came in. And I said, we already took this out to film. All you have to do, you got the master. And they said, no, you don't understand. We're going to come in and we're going to remaster this for 80 hours. And I was like, why would you do that? So, when you look at the cost of a film or a TV show, and you look at what it costs, the amount of assets that are requested and re-requested and different divisions, including marketing, as you know, if you make your day or come under, no one flows that money into post. So I think you need somebody at a high enough level of the studio that looks at the overall cost and says, this is what I used to spend on marketing. This is what I used to spend on post. I'm putting a lot of this up front, and assets are going to be combined or reused by different departments all along. There's going to be a huge savings. People may not realize that today, but there will be.
I also want to make the point that from a budgeting producing perspective, already you should have subject matter experts around you like Kathryn or Greg when you're looking at these types of numbers. But the complexity of what they're describing isn't honestly much different from other budget priorities you might have put on other projects, right? Instead of a helicopter and explosion, you're doing X number of times. It's all people and materials. So from that sense, it may sound a little tricky, but it really shouldn't be. Obviously, you want people around you that know this workflow very well. But again, people and materials, look at it like that. And a budget is a living, breathing document that shows your priorities anyway. So quick producer comment there. Okay, Peter Keenan asks, is there a recommended previs software you recommend? Anybody?
I mean, I guess Unreal Engine. If you're a cinematographer, I think Cinetracer is a cool option that's
heck yeah
out there.
I love Cinetracer. Eric has a very specific one. I'm going to try to read this all live. Thanks all for this. We love to stream the A-cam straight into a Zoom and also have the same Zoom on a laptop on set. Okay, have the same Zoom on laptop on set. So folks offset can contribute feedback remotely after a take, all in the same place. Any recs on that? I mean, Greg, maybe this is a question for you. I can take parts of this, but it depends a little bit on if you need to be wireless or wired. Yeah, I mean, A-cam straight into Zoom. Yeah, I mean, you could go camera, one of the Cube devices into Core, and then you could send Core to Zoom. And then,
yeah, so
yeah, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely. So there are different protocols like RTP, where basically, in fact, right now, we're on a Zoom, right? But we're restreaming to YouTube. So the entire world can see this, and YouTube is a different type of platform, different type of infrastructure. So what we did is we took the Teradek, we threw that into Fifth Kind, and here's the reason. People were already vetted on the show. We already had a sign-on for everybody. They already were using the platform. They were familiar with it. And so what we would do is on show days, all they had to do is go to their standard home screen when they log in, and there was a big blue button that says watch live. Well, you can't get more simple than that. Talk about those kits you sent out to your show. Yeah. That was really simple. Now, that's the plus side. The minus side is you're going through a very large streaming service, and there was about a 25 to 30 second delay. It's actually since been shortened. Now, for our director and for certain people who really needed that immediate response, they went right through Teradek core. And I could basically add in that, and I can assign encoders to destinations,
Yep.
and I can add lower thirds. There's
compression.
Actually, I was amazed how many handles there were and how many adjustments you can make directly in core, including adding 3D LUTs and all kinds of things. So it's pretty amazing using that app.
Yeah, in fact, maybe someone can put just a like intro to core blog post. I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
I actually loved core myself. I was like, oh, this I understand.
Yeah.
Question from YouTuber. How do you monitor on iPads? Is there an app that is used? Well, I think it's just called Core TV is what we were all doing. Yeah. And it is just a button. It's like view A cam. I just set them up by camera. So I had A, B, C, D, and I would have A cam in Miami, B cam in LA. And I was just kind of bouncing back and forth, lighting both of those. And since we were only doing specifically interviews, I mean, and with similar kits, very doable.
Yep. I can show that again real quickly, just to throw it up there if we have time. So this is basically what you would see, right? So you've got the A cam here. This is the larger stage. Just to blow it up a little bit, that was actually a load in where by the way, we found out that at our second location, we could only have 12 people on stage. And that was a surprise because we had like 30 people. So we had to move a lot of people off stage. So some of these examples you can see, actually this is our visual effects producer who's actually on stage. You were asking, should they be moved to stage? Yes, there she is. We were lucky to get Brooke from the Orville. So she was doing that. Again, you can see how the different sizes of stages between XR and Lux. Here again, we had the directors off stage because we could not have them on stage. That would have put us over 12. So they were off stage. All we had to do is bring our Apple TV 4Ks from home. The producer and I had these lying around our house. We just grabbed them, plugged them in, and we were rolling. There's the quality. I don't know if you guys, I'd love to hear what it looks like through Zoom. But it was a very beautiful looking image. You could actually really see the fidelity of the image through this. And this is me receiving it. This is not directly from the camera. This is me receiving it as anyone would receive it as my confidence check on set.
Yeah, and actually, I want to clear it up in case I made it confusing there. We went core directly to in-app to people's iPads on my end. We didn't have Zoom in between that. I just did a BBC thing yesterday, and we used Zoom for some reason. So anyway, just clearing that up. We used the core system end to end using a Cube device. Let's see here. Oh, so someone, how would you define virtual production? That's hard. Some of we discussed here. So we kind of touched on that in the first 10 minutes. Sorry about that. We had a little technical hiccup. So you'll be able to catch that on Teradek's YouTube first 10 minutes. We've recorded this whole thing. It's going to be there. Is LED walls the only way to go? What about projection? Is that an alternative? Sure.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, like it's almost the same. It's just an upgrade from like rear projection or from front projection. And then actually, if you want to get creative with everything, and Paul Bevick wrote an amazing white paper that sort of incorporated these ideas in relation to his light stage technology, but you could apply it to this as well. When you're adding lighting and creative light, the screen, the LED walls themselves will not omit hard patterns on somebody's face. But if it's important to you to have that soft reflection interaction with your character and then have a hard pattern from whatever content or world that you're creating, using a projector to create a hard pattern on your talent, like a stained glass window, if that's what they're looking at or something, that would be a technique you could use to enhance your lighting inside of volume.
Also, keep in mind, it really depends on, the background for an LED wall has to look like real life, right? So one of the things we've been discussing is HDR on screen. So, and not so much of how bright can it get, but with rear projection, there's definitely some limitations. But we want it to look, as Kathryn was mentioning, you've got your foreground, you've got your plane where the intersecting of the background. We want that to look to the camera, not to the eye, to be absolutely real life. So the more dynamic range we can get into that screen, the better.
Great. Quick question, Drew. Madeline, core system over Wi-Fi, could be bonded node, could be wired into your router, probably a combination of all three, definitely dependent on your situation. Let's see.
We used all three.
Yeah. I mean, that's usually what people are saying. They're using all three. Redundancy, right? Name of the game. We want redundancy.
Yeah.
What if a shot? Ian J has a question about LED wall limitations. Real quick here for you, Kathryn. What if a shot requires deep depth of field or rack focus from subject to background? This feels like a banding thing, but is this even possible with an LED wall? Racking into the LED wall? I don't know.
It depends on the creative. Physically, I wouldn't rack to the wall, no. But you could plan that dynamic shot in a way where you can maybe seamlessly transition that into like visual effects content that you've added later in post that matches that. So like maybe you start for whatever the creative reason is, maybe you have to start the shot that way and then transition in seamlessly into like a part of a virtual world. But that's something that I think, like, if you have a specific creative problem like that you're solving, you should test, how you see that in your head right now working out. And then that's the iteration phase that I'm talking about. Like, so you have this idea and you'd like to do something like that. Well, when you're on the stage, you can start asking yourself deeper questions. Like, do I really need to communicate it this way? If I do, does it make sense to do this shot with an LED wall? Or is this just a full visual effects shot? Or there should be more questions that are coming up for you, and as you answer them, you know what I mean? So that's what I would say. Build up a list of questions and then kind of go down that list, solving them through the testing of that.
Yeah,
because you could find some magic thing on the way, and because you're creative, and because the creative that you see in your head is different than probably even the example that I'm thinking of. Like you could solve something for all of us that would look really cool.
So Elliot Mack has a company called Lightcraft, and their product Halide Effects, if you don't know it. It basically, you can throw a green screen up right behind you and it will do that. You can actually rack between the virtual background, and because you're not actually shooting it, it's all done comp. It's amazing. I've seen these rack focuses. The TV show Once Upon a Time on ABC, there's many other examples, actually utilize this. So that would be more of a lower budget type show. It could be full budget. You could have green screens everywhere, but it's adaptable. I did a production where they basically threw up these little QR codes on the ceiling or on the floor, put a green screen up, calibrated the camera, and within less than an hour, we were up and running. Yeah. So there are definitely solutions out there.
Well, everyone, we are about at time here. So one thing I'd like to do is, Kathryn, Greg, if you could help me out with this. If one quick 2-3 sentence takeaway from each of you, I'll give you a little bit to think about that as I do one here myself. But the biggest takeaway from my perspective should be that this is absolutely achievable. You don't have to use the entire workflow that Greg was laying out there. You can use parts of it. You can tailor different aspects of this technology to previs, to your post, to your on-set workflow. All of that is fair game. You don't have to use everything in the kitchen sink. And there's absolutely indie aspects to this. So Greg, maybe I'll start with you. Take away from you from this panel.
Yeah, I think we said it all. Just summing up, is there are a variety of different solutions. Know what your budget is. Consult those in the industry through social media or other groups. There are a lot of experts out there, and then just start testing. I know a lot of people that are just starting to test. A lot of the gear is free. Unreal Engine is free. Go to the site if you're interested in that. There's a fellowship program, but there's also a learn at home program. So do what you can to get yourself educated. You will get a wealth of knowledge and discover more about what's possible just through the miracle of self-education at home.
Kathryn.
I guess my takeaway from the panel, or just kind of like a takeaway for the audience, would be like, this is a really cool time where it's like another democratization of the technology. There are new skill sets that are needed. So that means that new people with different kinds of skills, and crossovers of skills can kind of jump in. It provides opportunities for people who are mid-career and just starting their career, people who want to reinvent themselves. And from a studio level down, what's exciting is that there's so much interest in this, but there's not a lot of visibility right now for people who are like there are skilled artists needed. So if you have these skill sets, put yourself out there and let people know, because the people who are hiring need to see you. I think that's one of the pain points right now from like a studio level or from even the smaller VP community, is finding artists to kind of fill the need for this, or even producers or cinematographers or people who are interested in like, you know, participating in these workflows. And I think if you have a generalist background, it's a good time to be a generalist.
You are at the top of the heap if you understand parts of this workflow. You are more hireable, which is, I think, the aim for a lot of us. All right. So thanks to Kathryn. Thank you, Greg, for your time. I didn't get to everyone's questions. Please reach out to Teradek Small HD Wooden Camera over social, and Kathryn and Greg, and we can get those follow-up questions answered over various social media. Thanks again to Creative Solutions for helping to make this event possible. Please go to cs.inc to sign up for upcoming webinars. I think we'll probably do more of these, to be part of the live audience for Q&A sessions with guests and enjoy recordings of our past conversations. We had a little bit of a technical bobble for Zoom folks. You'll be able to catch the first 10 minutes on YouTube on Teradek's channel. And of course, please, please, please subscribe to Teradek's YouTube channel so we can do more of these. Each of these is each subscription is a vote for us to continue doing more of these. I'm so happy I wore my Mandalorian shirt, a little wrinkle today, but thanks everyone. Stay safe.
It is the way.
This is the way. Stay safe, stay healthy. Michael, you can hit that end card now. Bye everybody.
Thank you.